As one of the gems of the PlayStation 5 launch lineup, Demon's Souls is a gorgeous re-envisioning of the original From Software game, but with its own unique flavor. Bluepoint Games has a long history of high-quality releases, bringing classic games back to modern platforms, and Demon's Souls is perhaps its most ambitious project yet. We've already discussed many of the technical details with members of the development team, but now that I have my hands on the final game, we can finally take a closer look at each element to better understand how it all fits together. But of course, we'll also draw comparisons with the original PlayStation 3 game to see how it's changed since then, as well as test out performance. So, join me as we dive into the world of Demon's Souls. Initially released in Japan back in early 2009, Demon's Souls bubbled up as something of a phenomenon. At its core, it builds on concepts found in From Software's Kingsfield series. Players are sent into large, labyrinthian worlds to explore and conquer. The difficulty was high, but it was oh so compelling, and by the time it arrived in the West, it had become one of the most popular PlayStation 3 import games. Now, all these years later, From Software has given Bluepoint and Sony the blessing to recreate Demon's Souls from the ground up for PlayStation 5. The result is a more responsive, more detailed take on what is still a beautiful game in its original form. Before we continue though, it's worth noting that undertaking a remake like this is no small task, and as always, the stylistic changes may not appeal to everyone. I really like the new direction myself, but that's going to vary from person to person. With this in mind then, let us begin with a comparison between that PS3 original and the new PlayStation 5 version. The mood is somber in both cases. Players must make their way through these water-soaked tunnels as you come to grips with the game before arriving at the Nexus. It's immediately clear that Bluepoint is aiming to provide a much higher level of fine-grained detail in the environment. It's a style that's perhaps closer to From Software's later titles such as Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3 than it is the original PlayStation 3 game. Numerous effects that you'll see on PS3 have been adapted using modern technology. For instance, on PS3, From uses these transparent textures to simulate the misty atmosphere around you. The new version, however, uses proper volumetric fog and lighting to simulate this mood more accurately. Plants are now much more numerous, giving the world an overgrown, ruined appearance. Water behaves more realistically, and lighting is of course more natural all around, but they both have their charm. Another departure, the depiction of skylighting. The original seems to utilize technology created for Armored Core 4, and this manifests as overexposed skies in certain areas contrasted against the much darker world. This is around the time when a lot of developers moved to HDR pipelines, so it does make sense and it's consistent with the time. The 2020 version, however, normalizes this somewhat, and when played in actual screen HDR, the sky is rendered with a more realistic exposure level. As we continue then, let's discuss lighting in general. In a side-by-side, I certainly don't need to tell you that these games handle lighting differently, it's clear as day. But it also highlights one of the best aspects of the visuals, the way the shadows react to lighting. So in the original game, a dynamic light is attached to the player character to light the way through darkened environments. The light itself does not cast shadows, however, it simply creates a nice ambient glow around the player. For the remake, Bluepoint decided to use a mix of screen space directional occlusion and capsule shadows beneath the player to more realistically portray this light. In fact, all dynamic lights can now cast shadows, but it's more striking when examining the player. Take this for example, look closely at the edges of the geometry here. Notice how this changes based on the position of the light source. The edges of the door frame also demonstrate this same effect. There are thick, soft shadows that appear as light travels through the scene. This of course applies to all geometry and the tessellated surfaces, and it really enhances the depth of each scene. Now, the interaction of light and shadow is perhaps my favorite visual flourish of this new game, but there is more. That's not to say that there aren't nice shadows in the PS3 game. The player shadow is certainly well defined and sharp, but it's also somewhat less realistic as the position of the light source should cast shadows like we see in the remake here, soft and diffuse. But let's continue with our journey here in the Nexus. This area demonstrates a shift in color tone with a stronger red and blue hue used in the remake. The architecture also differs greatly between the two in this case. The original game features more earthen structures, while the remake goes for a more ornate design with glossier materials. This central area exhibits a distortion effect on PS5 as you walk across it. However, this brings us to another nifty feature, the filters. Now, it doesn't completely change the visual design, mind you, but you can apply a variety of filters to the remake to create an atmosphere more to your taste. It's available here in photo mode, but you can have it apply during the game as well. Let's continue onward to the Boletarian Palace. You might first notice a rather significant shift in architectural styles. I think both work rather well, and there could be arguments made to favor one style or the other. Technically, however, the new game is doing a lot more, as you would expect. Firstly, there's this massive increase in geometric complexity. Individual stones, bricks, and wooden slats feature dramatically more detail in the remake. Much of this detail is achieved using tessellation, which according to Bluepoint not only brings out more detail in the world, but also increases efficiency in building these assets. This is most evident when walking through some of the tighter areas. Like here, the walls on PS3 rely primarily on flat textures, which looks good enough for the time, but on PlayStation 5, Bluepoint instead uses tessellated stones to provide real depth to the materials that also respond to light correctly. But other areas of course benefit as well. The physically based materials combined with this tessellation helps create a sense of micro detail in every area. The more natural areas with rock formations especially benefit from this in a way that was kind of lacking on PlayStation 3. This is just a huge improvement all around. It really demonstrates how many triangles can be pushed by this new console. Now if we return back to the palace, you might also notice a nice demonstration of what volumetric lighting can bring to the table. The torch on the wall now illuminates the dust in the air, lending the game a thicker atmosphere. In fact, this is true for the rest of the game, and it greatly contributes to the overall atmosphere. For instance, this area just outside the mines, the intense sunlight illuminates the dusty atmosphere around you, creating a very different look compared to the overexposed sky on PlayStation 3, though it has its charms as well. What I really love is how the mine interior benefits from volumetrics. The glow of the lava fills the area with a choking blast of thick particles. It's stunning to behold. I also appreciate how weather is handled in the remake, which kind of ties into these features. The Shrine of Storms is a great example. It now features proper weather conditions, which is more befitting of the name. A light drizzle, which is lit by lights dynamically, fills the skies, while grass and trees now blow thanks to a new wind simulation. It really benefits from this upgrade. Thinking of particles, they're also used heavily in other areas such as this in rather large quantities. Now, of course, another natural element is water, which sees a huge boost in quality, reacting more realistically to player movement with subtle warbling of the surface as you move through it. The original game, in comparison, relies primarily on alpha textures designed to depict water splashes as you move across it. Really though, through my time in comparing the game, I was constantly in awe at the ways in which the original designs have been translated to the new version. Not everything is perfect, and some enemy designs I still kind of prefer on PS3, but overall it's a huge improvement. The later areas especially benefit from the new designs. Beyond the environment though, Bluepoint reworked the game's animation system. You have both male and female characters which enjoy new motion capture data that doesn't sacrifice any playability, which is key for this game, as like other Bluepoint releases, it maintains the core gameplay by utilizing the game's original source code. Now, the remake also features various adjustable options for players to customize, including a nice motion blur slider, which increases both per object and camera motion blur shutter speed, as well as the choice between a cinematic and a performance mode. So what's this about? Well, Bluepoint already confirmed that resolution-wise the performance mode runs at 1440p, while cinematic mode is native 4K. I can confirm this to be the case. With the game in hand, however, it's also possible to appreciate the other major difference, and that's the tessellation complexity. Basically, the tessellation factor is ramped up a notch when using the 4K cinematic mode, leading to a slight increase in overall scene density. Beyond this, however, both modes look very much the same. The improvements go beyond just visuals, however. During our interview, Peter from Bluepoint noted that a lot of time was spent on the destruction system. But how does it compare in action? Looking at the original game, destruction was a huge feature. Havoc physics were implemented into the game, allowing objects to be destroyed with a swipe of your sword. This often came with a performance penalty, of course, and the pieces would take a while to settle, but it was pretty cool. For the remake, the granularity of these interactions is improved, and the pieces now behave more realistically. There's less visible clipping, the pieces no longer shake and vibrate around after being destroyed, and there is no visible impact on frame rate. Furthermore, the state of destructibles is saved as you leave the area, which means you can walk across the entire map, then loop back to a destroyed table, and it will be in exactly the same place that you left it. Ragdolls are also handled more realistically this time. The original, while often hilarious, has bodies flop around as you collide with them. You still collide with bodies in the remake, of course, but the behavior is now more realistic. Then there is the loading. This is one of the biggest improvements to the flow of the game and really showcases what's possible on a fast SSD. On PlayStation 3, it takes a while to load into each area. The loading screens are nice, sure, but traveling between the Nexus and any other areas in the game takes quite some time. There's also significant loading upon death. It's not great, and unfortunately is something that the series has always struggled with. On PS5, the difference is transformative. Bluepoint now uses a fog effect to mask the transition between areas, and it helps these transitions feel more connected to the game world. It no longer feels as if you're looking at a loading screen, it's just a quick animation between 2 points. And then this is doubly true upon death. It's really fast. This really changes the perception of the Nexus too. This is one aspect that was tedious on PS3 as a result of the loading screens, but PS5 makes it feel like a seamless part of a much larger world. Hopping between these different areas is now a breeze. And it's something that really helps solidify the excellent world design. Revisiting this game highlights just how brilliant the level design truly is in comparison to many other modern games. Oftentimes, especially in open world games, I find myself pushing through large expanses, but not really internalizing anything I've seen. You just don't feel a connection to the world, as it's really just set dressing that you run across. With Demon Souls, the challenge forces you to play methodically, which in turn strengthens your relationship with each intricately designed area. You'll vividly recall spots that once gave you difficulty, or those which offered a brief respite. By the time you've finished Demon Souls, you'll remember nearly every inch of every level in the game. The fact that the level design remains this compelling is a true testament to From Software's excellent design, and the way in which Bluepoint has treated these designs only further increases the bond you'll feel with the game. Of course, one area where From has traditionally faltered is performance. The original game isn't unacceptable by PS3 standards, mind you, but it's not exactly fluid either. The remake, however, offers the aforementioned options, cinematic or performance. Basically, it's 30 frames per second versus 60 frames per second, depending on your choice. But how does it actually fare? Well, predictably, the game's 30 FPS cinematic mode managed to achieve its goal with relative ease. It's 30 frames per second, and that's really it. While I spent less time playing this mode in general, I also failed to find even a single blip in performance. It's completely locked. Honestly, it's not a bad mode on its own. The slight boost in visual quality and increase in resolution look great, and the excellent motion blur helps smooth things over even at a lower frame rate. The fact that it offers a perfect 30 FPS frame rate without bad frame pacing is also something that should be celebrated in the Souls community, as this is something From Software has never managed to get right. But clearly, it's the performance mode that is the real draw here, and thankfully it doesn't disappoint. Basically, the game locks to its 60 frames per second target almost perfectly. It's very stable and feels extremely smooth as a result. I've played through a huge chunk of the game, and I've found that by and large, it really is virtually perfect. Of course, there are some minor exceptions, such as when you warp into the prison here, there's a brief drop in fluidity, but these are thankfully few and far between. Not something you'll encounter often, but worth noting. There are occasional torn frames that can manifest as well, but again, it's rare. Considering both modes though, I certainly have a stronger preference for the 60 frames per second option, as, simply put, it's more responsive to play, and it looks better in motion. It's certainly the smoothest Souls title yet released on consoles either way. Let's just hope that From Software itself can deliver something similarly smooth with its next game. Now, looking back, more than anything, I have to say that I'm impressed with the beauty and fluidity on display with Demon's Souls. Launch games, especially in the most recent generations, often feel somewhat lacking when it comes to fit and finish, but this feels like a high-end game that could have been released late in the console generation, and still be right at home. It looks great, it runs smoothly, and it loads quickly. It's a perfect demonstration of what the hardware can deliver. I suppose that's true of some of the other exclusive games on PS5 such as Spider-Man, but Demon's Souls in particular really stands out. So yeah, ultimately Demon's Souls is another jewel in Bluepoint's increasingly heavy crown and demonstrates why they're the best in the business when it comes to remaking modern games for new platforms. Beyond the technical qualities of this version though, it also highlights just how good the core game design of Demon's Souls truly is. There's a reason why this game changed From Software's fortunes forever. It really is an expertly designed experience from start to finish, a perfect example of superb level design, excellent gameplay mechanics, and a nice challenge. It can be difficult, yes, but that challenge is always surmountable and it feels great when you do it. So while this is a remake, rather than an entirely brand new game, I do think Demon's Souls for PlayStation 5 may go down in history as one of the finest launch titles for any new console. It really is that good, and if you've been on the fence about trying the series, this is a great place to jump in. But that's gonna do it for this video, so I hope you enjoyed it. During production, I did lose a lot of my original video files to a hardware problem, so it did take a little longer than I would have liked, but here we are. If you enjoyed it though, as always, be sure to like and subscribe and ring that notification bell for instant updates from Digital Foundry, and of course come find us over on Twitter for plenty of discussion. And until next time, this is John signing off.